Hey everybody, welcome to your free GMAT prep hour. My name is Reed Arnold. It is March 22nd, 2020. I'm broadcasting here from New York, New York. To those of you that are here, welcome. To those of you that are watching a recording later on, cheers, hope you're well. Having a pretty fun lesson today. I'm excited about today's free GMAT prep hour. Okay, first off, if you are looking for more free prep options, you can try one of our GMAT classes. You can try the first class of any class. You can go for free. That's 1/9 of a GMAT course. We cover some really big stuff in class 1. So if you're curious about what we offer, pick a teacher, go to a class, see what you see. If you like it, you can sign up. If you don't, no worries. Okay, you can also try our Interact. That's our on-demand video course, an award-winning software. It actually adapts to you as you watch the video, much like the test does. You get a question right, and the program gives you a harder question. If you get a question wrong, the program shifts and spends a little more time digging into that, making sure you're clear on what that question is. All right. So today for our free GMAT prep hour, I've decided to talk about the 24 things every GMAT studier needs to do. And I picked 24 for no reason. That's just the number that I counted to. I didn't have a number in mind and try to get there. I just started thinking of like, what are the things I want GMAT studiers to do and know? And the list ended up being 24 items long, which seems about right. And the reason I'm doing this is because after a class a few weeks ago, a student of mine, or after a practice test, a student of mine emailed me and said, Reed, my score didn't go up. Which is, first off, not uncommon for those of you that are studying. It's not uncommon to have a practice score drop or stay the same. It tends to take some time to see the jump. Okay, it's a very stair-step increase typically. But she emailed me and she was a little bit frustrated. She said, my score didn't go up. I know my timing was bad. But do you have any advice? Is there any advice for me? And it's a question I often get. And I often get it, at the end of a 9-week course. It's like, all right, my score's at a 630. I want a 720. Do you have any advice? And I'm always like, I just gave you 27 hours of advice. Like what? Yeah, I have some advice. I just gave you a lot of advice. What advice are you looking for? I have students who say like, what's like the cheat sheet? Where's just the sheet of things that I need to know, and then I can get a great score on this test. And I wish it were that easy, but it's just not. There's not one cheat sheet. But there are things you can do and things you should be doing. And so when students ask, do you have any advice? My first thought is kind of, what advice that I've given have you followed? Because I'll just be honest, I feel like a lot of times it's not much. A lot of times, does anyone know who this picture is down here? Just out of curiosity. Does anyone know who this is a picture of? Any classical art majors? I did not know this picture. I just searched the name because I know the myth, but does anyone know who that is? Okay. That's fine. I wouldn't have known who this painting is of either. But this is a portrait of Cassandra, and Cassandra is a mythological figure who was doomed to have the gift of prophecy and have no one believe her guidance. And that's kind of what I think we GMAT teachers sometimes feel like. We feel like we are giving, good advice to students. This is what you need to do to study. This is what you need to know. And students then don't really take it. They go and do their own thing. They go and, hammer through the GMAT official guide and just do all the questions and don't really reflect and don't really learn from the things they're doing. They just do a lot of questions. And that's the exact opposite of what we teach. And so I'm just this is the one-stop shop. Like, this is what I want you to do. This is what I want you to be studying for. This is what I want you to know. And I sent this list out to the entire company to see if anyone had any, anything they thought didn't belong or anything they thought they wanted to add. And it's possible that, some people didn't read it, but by and large, people, said like, yeah, that's a pretty good list. There'll be some little qualms, I'm sure, some things people disagree with, but by and large, like, this is the stuff. This is what the GMAT is. Okay. This is what you need to practice and need to do and need to work on. All right. So with that, let's dive in. First thing, number one thing, big thing, as you study, you need to keep a redo log. All right. You need to log questions you've done that you need to learn from. You need to revisit them in a systematic way so that you are revisiting and reminding yourself of the takeaways. You need to find takeaways. Every question, find lessons, things that you need to carry forward. Okay. Takeaways are typically 4 things. They're either concepts, rules, or formulas, just, the basic building blocks of what the test is testing. They are habits you need to change. They are strategies you need to be more aware of. and they are inferences, or what I call inference opportunities, okay? And an inference opportunity, that's just like a chance where knowing a few pieces of information, you realize, or even just one piece of information, lets you know another piece of information, right? Like if I know 1/3 of a pet store are dogs, that just tells me that 2/3 of the pet store are not dogs. That's just an inference that I can make instantly by knowing that piece of information. And the GMAT's full of such opportunities, okay? So look out for those 4 things. These are the 4 big things you kind of want to find, okay? And when you put a question on a redo log with a takeaway and a lesson, you want to revisit it in a, as I mentioned, a systematic, scheduled way, okay? Redo 1, you want to come back really soon, 2 to 5 days. Try it again, make sure you remember what you needed to learn. Your brain is going to tell you that it's going to remember everything, but your brain is a liar. Everyone's brain is a liar. Your brain forgets as much as it remembers, if not more, okay? And so you come back to it soon, you remind your brain what it needs to learn. If it remembers it, great. Then you let it sit for a week. Come back a week later. Right? Do it again. If everything goes well then, fantastic. Come back 2 weeks after that. If everything goes well, you come back 4 weeks after that. If everything goes well, 8 weeks after that. But you're going to find very, very often that redo number 3 comes around and you're actually going to miss the problem again, or you're going to forget how to do it. Well, you review it, you learn it, you remind yourself the takeaways, and you go back 2 to 5 days. Start the process over. Okay? And this is a much better study tactic than just doing a boatload of questions and hoping that some stuff sticks. I always say that's like going to the driving range and swinging a golf club 1,000 times and calling it progress, right? You have to be thoughtful about how your swing is and how you need to change your swing and where your shots are going and why they're going that way, okay? So this redo log is the #1 study tool that I and many of my fellow instructors give their students. And I would say, 1 in 20, 1 in 30, keep a redo log. That's, close to what I would advise. And I would say 1 in 50 do it really well, right? But if you're going to study, keep a redo log. Log questions you need to learn from and really learn from them, okay? Number 2, you need to force yourself to answer questions in a GMAT pace and to get used to bailing, all right? Every time you sit down to do a GMAT problem, you have to treat it like the test, okay? This first pass, when you see this question, you're going to treat it like the test. You're going to do it as if it were actually test day. And that means you need to get used to choosing a letter even when you don't want to choose a letter, because you're going to have to do that numerous times on the actual thing. The test is designed to adapt to a point where you are missing problems. There's no studying so well that you get every question right. That doesn't happen. They give you questions you're going to miss. You need to get used to missing them. That's part of the game. Okay, there's no avoiding it. So keep a clock, force yourself to answer in a GMAT pace. For math problems, for quant questions, that's 2-minute average, 2.5 if you're like really certain you're going to get it right. Not really certain you might get it right or can get it right, or I'm a smart person, I really should get this right. You know you're getting it right. And then 3-minute is kind of the max. You don't want to go longer than that, all right? So force yourself to answer. After you've done this, I want to be clear, stop the clock, put it away, try the problem as long as you want. You can do it for 20 minutes for all I care. But that first pass, treat it like the test, okay? Critical reasoning, 2-minute average, 3:15, no longer than that. Sentence correction, 1:20 average, no longer than 2 minutes. A reading comp passage and the 3 questions associated with it. For a shorter passage, about 6 to 7 minutes. For a longer passage, about 7 to 8 minutes, okay? And you want to get used to the timing of this test. Number 3, you want to review problems and your approach to them actively and thoroughly. There's some overlap here, right? This applies to the redo log. Part of the redo log is finding takeaways. And to find takeaways, you have to really dissect the problems you're doing. You can't just treat every question as an assessment of your skill. That's what so many people study for. They just do a question and they determine, right or wrong. And if it's right, they're like, great, I'm good, I don't need to review this. And if it's wrong, they might read the explanation and be like, okay, I know how to do this now, and then they leave. You got to be more curious than that, okay? Every question in the official guide and on the practice test, they are not just assessments of your skill, they are clues into the kind of thinking that you are doing and the kind of thinking that the test rewards. And you need to, find where there are gaps there and close them. Figure out to think in the way that the test rewards. You have to break questions down. Every question is a series of micro skills, okay? And you have to figure out, especially if you miss a problem or struggle with a question, you have to find the micro skill, that moment that you wrestle with most, that takes the most time, that doesn't feel comfortable, okay? So review really thoroughly, find the snags. And really, in quant, try to find multiple ways to do the question. There are typically, 2 or more. Not every question. Sometimes there's just like one way. But in quant, a lot of times there's a lot of setups, a lot of organizational approaches. There's a lot of strategies you can use, a lot of different tactics. And if you just do one and kind of get it and move on, you're really shortchanging yourself. You want to build a rich toolkit here. And so, one thing when students ask me, do you have any advice? I'm like, how many times have you studied a problem and found more than one way to do it? And so many of my students are like, I don't know, I don't really do that much, and that's just the norm. And it's like, this is my advice. This is what you have to do to study, okay? You don't study questions just to figure out if you get them right or wrong. You treat them as a subject to dissect, okay? Figure out where the, what's going on in the guts of that sentence, of that question. Number 4, you want to make flashcards for any rule, concept, formula, mechanic that must be memorized. This is for like the first level, what do I need to know? Okay. And flashcards need to be very simple, to the point, get the core concept across. I'm always a little cautious of flashcards because they're not the end all be all. And you can't make a flashcard for absolutely everything on the test. And there's no way, that a flashcard will cover you can't make flashcards for something more abstract like problem solving tactics that are so necessary here. But for the rules and the formulas and the mechanics, yeah, make your flashcards, get them memorized, get them down pat, and review them thoroughly, get those first building blocks really, really solidly memorized, okay? Number 5, you want to practice mindfulness. Studies have shown that students who practice mindfulness and study do better than people who only study. The test is going to be stressful. It's going to, test you and test your patience and make you frustrated and make you disappointed and angry and all that stuff. But how are you going to deal with that? You have to know how to deal with that. Mindfulness is a great way. It's basically diet meditation. You can go to Headspace, get the Headspace app. You can buy Logan Thompson's book, Beyond the Content. It's a book specifically about mindfulness and test prep. It's a really good read. But somehow you have to prepare for this aspect of the test. Excuse me, there's one thing I meant to mention about timing, and a teacher clued me in on this and reminded me that I should mention it. The test really does punish you for not finishing. You get way more punished for not finishing than you get rewarded for, wait, what was I going to say? You get way more punished for not finishing than you get punished for answering questions wrong. Okay, a blank answer hurts you more than a wrong answer. So make sure that you are finishing, and that requires good timing habits. Number 5, practice mindfulness. Number 6, you really need to study to work to understand the non-math class strategies, right? That's math class strategies are typically, algebra, set up an equation, solve for X. I'm not saying algebra is not important, but I am saying that virtually every student I've come across overemphasizes how important it is. And for some reason has this like weird, like proud, almost like fetishization. Is that how you say that word? I don't know. Like they like really worship algebra. They think that it like makes them better if they know the algebra. And that's just, it's a tool. It's a tool like any of these other tools. Okay, so I'm not saying don't practice algebra. You should, and you should get better at it. But for God's sakes, there are many other approaches out there that are just as good and sometimes way, way, way better on questions. You need to know how to pick smart numbers. You need to, and when to pick smart numbers. You need to know how to use the answers and back solve. You need to realize that a lot of times you can just estimate. There are ways to not actually do all the math. You need to know that a lot of questions can be organized by pictures or charts or drawing the number line out, okay? You need to get really, really good at testing cases. We'll talk about that soon. Sometimes you're going to list a set or a sequence of numbers. You need to know when to do that. You can make logical quantitative inferences. You need to know how to do that. If you're always trying to set up an equation and solve for X, you're going to shortchange yourself, okay? But almost all my teachers would agree, I suspect, that our students like vastly understudy non-algebra approaches, partially because they think that it's like the, bad at math way. Like we're teaching them we're teaching you this because you can't really do it kind of thing. And that's just absolutely not true. When you take the real test, when I take the real test, I pick numbers all the time. I back solve often. I draw pictures and charts all like I tested cases when I took the real test. I tested cases, God, 6 of the 13 questions. Okay. You can watch me take a test on the free GMAT Prep Hour page on YouTube. Watch how many times I test cases in data sufficiency. I do it all the time. You have to be comfortable with it. Okay, so look for those non-math class strategies. Number 7, you need to get really good at the pre-statement work in data sufficiency. And I'm going to emphasize step 4, rephrasing the question. You always want to specify what's given. You want to specify what the question asks. You want to know if it's a value or a yes/no question. But you need to get really, really good at this phase also. And too many students just blow past it. They just get right to the questions. They don't even think about what they're looking for, what they're asked. You need to, think about, what does this question really ask? What do these givens really mean? What do they really tell me? What's possible under these givens? What are the possible situations I can lay out? Which outcomes yield which answer to the question? Figure out what different outcomes are possible based on what. You can do a lot of work before you get to the statements. And on a question where the question is like longer, more complicated, that's when this is really important. If the question itself seems more difficult in the statements, that's where the work is. The work is on the question. Okay, this is a thinking test. It rewards thinking. So think up front. Don't jump too fast to the statements because you think that's where the work is. A lot of times it's not. This step 4 is very under practiced. So when you do data sufficiency, review how well you did each step and really look at this one. Did you miss a chance to rephrase? Okay. In general, I'm going to advise that you try to overcorrect on anything you need to work on. You need to try to go to like the bizarre extreme. If you don't rephrase enough, you need to see like, how far can I take rephrasing? Can I rephrase so much that Reed, the GMAT instructor, is going to tell me like, whoa, so okay, you're going too far. Go too far. We'll pull you back. But try to overcorrect on these things you need to work on. Okay. Number 8, you need to know how to test cases like it's nobody's business. It has to be automatic, easy. You need to know the process absolutely clear. This is a point of special frustration for me because I am sick and tired of teaching testing cases in class 1 and emphasizing how important it is. And then 8 weeks later, we're doing a problem and someone messes up testing cases. Okay, top 10 things right here. Most important stuff to learn. You have to know how to test cases. You have to know what the process is, what the logic is. There are 3 things to consider. What case am I testing? What rules must be followed? What answer to the question does this case yield? Okay, you have to have some repeatable, organized structure that will minimize errors in the testing cases process. Something that separates the process into case, rule, question. I don't care what it is. There are a few out there, but have a system. The most common errors in testing cases are mixing up the constraint, that is mixing up what the rule is and what to do with the rule, and mixing up what the question asks. People think that not following the rule tells you something about the answer to the question, and it doesn't. Okay, if you break a rule, you throw a case out, always. It's just automatic. Okay, and another common mistake is carrying statement 1 into statement 2. You have to start over, pretend you haven't seen statement 1. So this right here is just an example. If I'm trying to answer, is X odd? And I'm given a rule, 4X is even. Okay, I have to follow that rule with different cases and see if I can get different answers. But that logic has to be clear. Different answers, rule followed, here are the cases. Has to be utterly automatic. Cannot make mistakes on that. Especially because as you get better at the test, the rules, they get more complicated. They get harder to follow. You have to think more to follow the rules. So you need to know the exact process for when that rule is followed or not followed, what happens next. You can't let the confusion of the rule confuse you in the process. Number 9, you need to become a sentence structure master. You have to read sentences for structure. Okay, this picture right here is from a lesson with a private tutoring student recently. I just took a screenshot just to show you how we cut up and dissected the question and really laid out like, here's the subject, here's the verb. Okay, the arrows are where there's modifiers. We circled parallelism markers in pink here. We noticed a conjunction that was joining ing modifiers. We really cut it up and specified how the sentence was built, because that's how you have to start practicing. That's how you have to practice reading sentences for sentence correction. Okay, a sentence structure master does not read top to bottom, left to right. That can't be how you read. You don't have time. You have to read at a more structural level. They effortlessly find the sentence cores. That is the subjects, the verbs, the conjunctions, like the building blocks of the sentence. They know the rules of structure cold. They know how the GMAT messes up sentence structure. They know how to connect clauses in a correct way, and they know what an incorrect structure looks like. A good sentence structure master clumps words in the sentence based on their function, right? You know, so if I have a sentence that's like Albert Einstein studied the gravitational effects of acceleration and its effect, and its, I don't know, and its warping of the blah, 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 all this chaos, right? A good sentence structure reader kind of stops here and just starts clumping all this together of like, okay, here's what Einstein studied. I can dig into it if I need to, but like just structurally, here's what Einstein studied. I can pass over that to find bigger structure issues first, and then dig into that moment if I find that that's where the error might be, okay? They don't just read top to bottom, left to right, and pick the sentence that sounds good. They are cutting sentences up all the time, okay? You can't do this on the test, right? These drawings here, you can't actually label and highlight and underline, I'm afraid. But this mentally is what's going on. And so I'm telling students now to buy a set of colored pencils, write out full sentences with the underline inserted in the sentence, and just, you know, write out all 5 answer choices and just start labeling structures. Here's the subject, here's the verb, here's the object, here's the conjunction, here's some parallelism, here's a modifier, it's describing this thing. Just get good at that. Don't even try to answer the question, just get good at sentence structure, okay? It's huge. I should also mention, I meant to say this up front, so there is an order to these, 1 to 24, and I can't say that, like, you know, number 7 is more important than number 9, or that something like that. But there is some, I tried to order it somehow, like where number 7 is more important than number 19, right? So there is some importance to the order, but not every single piece is in order, just a general trend. But this one's huge. You have to get good at sentence structure. And this is what you need to, you know, you need to ask yourself, am I practicing sentence structure? Or am I just doing sentences? Okay. A good a good GMAT studier learns to use the splits in sentence correction. The splits being the difference in the answer choices. They don't just read top to bottom, left to right. They find where the differences are. They know what the differences mean, or they practice finding where the differences are, and they practice thinking about what they mean. And they use those to make eliminations so that they don't have to read every word, okay? So if I have a sentence that says the number of cherry tomatoes in the Bordeaux region of France has increased or have increased, I know it's got to be has increased, because it's the number has increased. I don't have to read any of this stuff to know that this whole sentence is wrong, because the subject is number and the verb is has increased. This is also a lesson in sentence structure, okay? Use the splits, make eliminations strategically. In quant, you want to develop organizational and mechanical habits that will minimize silly mistakes. It's one of the, you know, it's one of the score killers. Making a few, you can make a few silly mistakes, you can recover. I don't say you have to be perfect. But if you make too many on questions that you would otherwise get right, you're just kneecapping yourself every time. And you need to make active habits to change them. Again, overcorrect. Go further than you think you need to. Write down more than you think you need to. Read a question more than you think you need to. Double check your arithmetic more than you think you need to. Really make this a habit, okay? Some common mistakes: losing minus signs, mixing up multiplication, addition, exponents, right? There's a lot of similarity between those things, but there are some subtle differences and some rules that only apply to, you know, certain ones. Like if I had, you know, if I multiplied 4 times 3w times 4w, does this become 12w times 16w? Like, do I distribute the 4 to the 3 and to the 4? No. You don't, but I see people do this kind of thing all the time. I distribute when there's addition, not over multiplication, okay? So, you know, develop habits and maybe make a flashcard for the rule or mechanic, whatever it is that you need to master. Minimize your silly mistakes. What are you doing to actively minimize your silly mistakes? For instance, I myself, I got so tired of saying that like -3 minus 7 equals 4. Like, I got so tired of doing this that anytime negatives show up in algebra or arithmetic, I just slow down. I just tell, like, okay, slow down, take another second or two, don't mess this up. Negatives are totally counterintuitive, and you will make a mistake if you're not careful. That's just something I have developed. I just do it every time. Have some for yourself, okay? Number 12, you need to work to understand exactly how assumptions work in critical reasoning. And you need to know how to ruin arguments on their own terms. This is fundamental to the critical reasoning questions on the test, and especially the assumption family, which is a bulk of the critical reasoning questions on the test. Okay. So this is just a mock example. We have a movie theater that's renovating. It's going to have the nicest seats. It's going to serve good food and alcoholic beverages. So the conclusion is this change will increase ticket sales. Well, we want to think about how this argument would be ruined. Forget the answers. Again, a lot of this stuff you'll notice is not like dealing with actual questions. It's dealing with reasoning, dealing with how we're thinking. How does this argument fall apart? Well, it falls apart if it doesn't increase ticket sales. It falls apart if people don't come because the theater is really far away. They didn't really care about the seats. They cared about how far it was. What if this change makes prices so expensive that people don't want to come? Okay. These are the things that make this argument fall apart. So the assumptions then save the argument from falling apart. So if it would ruin the argument that the price goes up so much that people don't come to the theater anyway, the assumption is that the price will not go up so much that people don't come to the theater anyway. If it ruins the argument that people keep avoiding the theater because it's so far away, we're assuming that the nicer amenities entice people to come, even if it's far away, right? These are the assumptions that keep the argument afloat. A strengthener will make these assumptions a little more likely, and a weakener will make them a little less likely. Okay, but you have to get really good at just dealing with the argument. Forget the questions. Stop trying to do so many questions. Dig into the arguments, figure out their gears, figure out their guts, figure out the logic and where the logic kind of falls apart. Number 13, you want to learn to read a reading comp passage for the main ideas, and you want to get good at summarizing chunks into little, simple, like childishly easy summaries. You want to be able to take a chunk of text and summarize it down. It's like, this is the point. Okay. You need to know what to read for in reading comp and not feel like you have to understand everything. Right. This right here is an example of someone's passage map. Now, there's some debate on whether or not we should encourage people to take notes. I'm a fan of taking notes, but only when it's done well, and only when the point of the notes is to summarize big points into simple chunks. And so notice what this was. I forgot what teacher this was, but notice the notes here, and we don't really have context, so we don't know exactly what they were writing, but we get that something wasn't great. It was mostly propaganda. Right? That's a very simple, whatever that summary was. I'm sure that was 4 sentences. That were the point of those sentences was, yeah, that wasn't so good. It was just propaganda. But then someone else said, no, it was really great. Apparently, I don't know. There's some conflict here. Okay, we have some disagreement because conflict is one of the big things that reading comp questions deal with. All right, these are the things you want to look for in reading comp. I call them the 6 C's: convictions, comparisons, cause effect, changes, conflict, and categorizations. You don't need to understand everything, but you want to work on chunking information down to simple, digestible sentences. Read for the why. Why did the author include this sentence, paragraph, chunk of text? What are they trying to get at here? Rephrase the things in your own simple terms and actively read. Work to change your reading habits. You can't just keep reading top to bottom, left to right. It's not going to work. We had a discussion here. I should include this. Don't be afraid to reread. A lot of students think that like rereading is a bad thing when virtually every teacher I know will reread. They might not read the paragraph and then go back and read the paragraph. They might read a little bit and then reread that bit again and then read a little further and then reread that. Right, really work to understand the purpose of each moment as you read down. Okay. In critical reasoning and reading comp questions, you want to take time to think before you go to the answer choices. All right. Just like in data sufficiency, a lot of times you want to think about the question before you go to the statements and dissect the question and investigate the question. You want to do that in CR and RC before you go to the answer choices. In reading comp, you want to look back at the relevant text to answer the question and find the sentence. And the fact is, guys, it's almost always one sentence. Even if it's a main idea question, there's a sentence that answers the thing. Find that sentence and then predict an answer based on that sentence. In your own words, what is the answer going to say? Now, there are some questions, like an accept question, or there's some question that might have a list of things and you're going to deal with only one of them. But if a specific prediction is not possible, you can at least specify what the answer needs to do, what it needs to accomplish, what it's going to kind of look like. And you want to think about that before you go to the answer choices. In critical reasoning, before you go to the answer choices, you want to think about if it's an argument question, which most of them are. Again, you want to think about what ruins the argument and what assumptions save the argument. Those are the big things to pinpoint after you've read the passage. And then you want to specify what the right answer needs to do in terms of those assumptions. An assumption will state the assumption. A strengthener will make the assumption more likely. And be specific, though. You can't just say, well, I want this answer to strengthen the argument. What does that mean in the context of the argument you're trying to strengthen? What assumption needs to be more likely? And maybe even think about what kinds of things would make it more likely. Okay. And then you go to your answer choices. But you don't just go to the answer choices and pick the one that kind of your gut is pulled to. You have to be more thoughtful than that. It's a reasoning test. So do some reasoning at this point. When reviewing critical reasoning and reading comp, you want to really work to pinpoint where your mistake was. This is similar to the frog thing we talked about earlier, but this is specific to reading comp and CR. As far as I can tell, there are 3 places people make a mistake in these types of questions. Either you did not interpret or understand the language of the passage or the answer. Okay, that's the first thing to check. Did I really understand what I was reading? And I'm just going to tell you, there are many times where I'm working with a student and I ask them, what does that sentence mean? And they give me the sentence in their own words, and it's not quite right. Okay, and if you find that you're misreading a lot, I would say go to sentence correction. Start looking at structure. Find subject verbs. Deconstruct what that sentence means structurally. If you did read well and you understood what the language was, okay, then did you correctly answer the question on your own terms, right? Did you specify what the answer needed to do, or did you predict the answer correctly? If you didn't do that well, you might miss the question. If you did do that well, then your problem was in choosing the answer. Okay? You did not choose an answer that actually matched the prediction or that actually achieved the goal you needed to be achieved. So one drill I'm having students do is take a piece of paper, and on the right hand of this paper, write down the prediction or write down the thing the right answer needs to achieve. And then on the left side, write down the answer you chose or the answer you were really tempted by. And then try to build the logical chain from, I should maybe mix up my hands. I don't know if the camera reflects or not. Let's say this is left. You want to try to build the logical chain from the answer you chose to the thing you needed the answer to do. Because here's the thing, guys. If the answer was wrong, there is a break in that chain. There has to be, or it would be a right answer. And so you need to figure out where the chain breaks. Either you're making a jump that's too big, it's unsupported, or you are you realize that the chain actually leads to the opposite of what you need the answer to do. Okay, or you've misread what the statement actually, you've misread what the answer actually means. You need to go back here. Did you really read the answer correctly? But somewhere there's going to be a break, and you want to find out where that is, because that will give you a sense of what reasoning the GMAT allows. Then take the right answer, take the answer that's correct, and take out the goal you needed the answer to achieve, and go from here's what the answer says explicitly, here's the goal, piece by piece, see how that chain doesn't break, because it can't, or it would be a wrong answer. Okay. But really cut into the reasoning in your verbal reviews. A lot of students think, verbal review or verbal questions are so subjective. These both are right. It's just that this one seems more right, or I think these both are right, or I think my answer is more right, and the one they chose is less right, and it's annoying. No. Virtually always it's objective. Now, there have been a scant few questions that I take issue with, but I'm just going to let you know it's 1 in 400 that I've read where I'm like, I don't think that's fair. I don't think that really fits. Okay, but it's pretty rare. Almost all the questions follow a precise, clear logic if you really get into the guts of it. I think this is something next free GMAT prep hour I'm going to demonstrate. I'm going to show you how to review critical reasoning and reading comp questions. Really lay out the logic of them. Number 16, you need to really master modifiers in sentence correction. Okay, know the different kinds of modification structures, practice recognizing and finding these in sentences, and understand how subtle changes in modifiers affect sentence meaning. Common modifier splits: a sentence that opens with a modifier. The word which needs to be a big word you start to notice. So much of sentence correction, for the record, is about noticing little words that have big impact, just in general. So which is a big word. Comma ing modifiers describe a subject verb clause. Comma eds, they have a few different rules depending on where they are. Prepositions can describe a noun before or a verb depending on how they're used. The word that describes the noun before or the noun phrase before. Ing words describe the noun before or after. It depends on how they're used, but you have to be automatic in recognizing them and thinking about how they're structured, what they modify, what they're supposed to modify, if the modification is clear and correct and really means what the sentence needs to mean. Okay. Number 17, you need to become a master of parallel structure. This one is pretty big. This one might be, 17 might be too low for this one. Okay, parallelism is super repetitive if you just learn to see it and learn to find it. And the key here is to use conjunctions. Notice where the conjunction is, because that's going to tell you what parallel structure is being built. You need to think about parallelism in the three parts of every parallel structure. There are markers, elements, and a root phrase. And every time it's that, you just need to be really fast and really good at finding those things. Here's the element, here's the marker, here's the root phrase. I did a whole video on parallelism. You can search it on the free GMAT prep hours. It's I think the last one that's been posted, actually. Everything you need to know about parallel structure. Watch that video, start noticing it in sentences. It's really a quick and clear way to cut through answer choices. Okay, but again, I teach this and then 4 weeks later, I ask about parallelism and it's like, I don't remember. It's when words look the same. And it's like, why are you even studying? I'm trying to help you. Okay, learn this stuff. I know it's boring, but it'll get you a good GMAT score, get you into a good business school. One thing you need to be able to do is move between percents, ratios, and fractions automatically and effortlessly. They're all different ways of saying the same thing, and the more fluid you are and the more quick you are moving from one to the other, the better. When I took the test in last April, there were like 4 or 5 questions that were almost explicitly dealing with fractions, ratios, percents, and just dealing with the relationships they set up. And as long as you're clear on that, you're going to get the right answer. Okay, so this is just an example I laid out here. If I know A to B is 4 to 5, that means there's like this total of A's and B's. And I can say all of these things, and they mean the exact same thing. If I know the ratio is 4 to 5, that means A is 80% of B, 20% less than B. B is 125% of A, 25% more than A. A is 4/9 of the total, B is 5/9 of the total. I can do all these as fractions or percents. They all mean the exact same thing. They give the exact same relationship. If you can just generate this list automatically every time you're given one of these values, if you can just see all the others automatically, you're just going to be in a really good place with percent questions and ratio questions. So there's a drill I tell my students to do. It's literally just to pick a ratio of cows and horses on a farm. And don't pick like 61 to 72. Use ratios that GMAT uses: 1 to 4, 4 to 5, 2 to 3, right? Simple ratios, and just lay out all the other ways of saying that relationship. Okay. Number 19, in sentence correction, you need to spot comparisons. Notice where comparisons are. Notice the words that indicate comparisons. Unlike, that just puts you into comparison mode. And then use the structure to specify what's being compared. Unlike most fantasy novels, Patrick Rothfuss is unlike a fantasy novel? That doesn't make sense. I need to compare an author to an author or a fantasy novel to a fantasy novel, but I can't compare a fantasy novel to an author who wrote fantasy novels. It's not how it works. It's one of the biggest things in sentence correction. So you just need to be really good at it. This is what you need to look for. In critical reasoning, you want to be really good at categorizing the structure of the argument. Just know kind of which type of argument you're dealing with. There are two that show up again and again and again, a prediction or a plan, and a guessed cause. And they're similar. If you look at these two arguments, they're similar, but there's a subtle difference here. It was raining, so the sidewalk will get wet. And it's our job to wonder, well, what if that's not true? What if the sidewalk doesn't get wet? I don't know how it could happen. Maybe there's a canopy, whatever. Or you might see an argument that says the sidewalk was wet, so it must have rained. And it's our job to be like, well, maybe something else made the sidewalk wet. Okay, almost every argument fits one of these structures, or sometimes there's like a combination of both, right? But like you need to be clear that these are the most common structures of arguments. And when you're reading one, you need to realize what kind of argument you're dealing with. Okay. 21 on data sufficiency. We've mentioned testing cases a few times. You need to test cases to prove sufficiency or insufficiency, even when your gut instinct tells you not to. So why don't you just take a minute or so to read these three questions and kind of think about them, okay? Okay, I don't want you to actually, you don't have to actually do these questions or work on these questions, but it's my suspicion kind of that some of these, if not all of them, your first gut instinct for many people is that this is not sufficient, right? That how am I supposed to answer this question when I don't know anything about k except that it's an integer? I have no idea what k is. So how am I supposed to know what w is? How do I know what the perimeter is if I don't know what b and d is, right? If I only know a plus c, how am I supposed to know what the perimeter is? How do I know what the difference between the median and the mean is if I don't even know how many numbers there are? How am I supposed to answer this question? Well, if you test cases in all these situations, you're going to find out that you do know the answer to this question. These are all sufficient, okay? And the only way to really know that is to have that gut instinct and then to check it. To say, I think this, I suspect this, but let me go through the reasoning process and actually prove it. You'll avoid traps, you'll avoid silly mistakes, okay? There are other times where you might think something is sufficient, but then you actually test cases and think about what else is possible and realize it's insufficient. But you need to, A, get good at testing cases, and B, do it even when you suspect you don't need to, because it will save you missing questions. It will save you avoiding, it will help you avoid traps. And believe me, the GMAT is loaded with traps, many of them just psychological. There's no way you can avoid having a first gut instinct. Everyone has a first gut instinct. The difference is that a good test taker realizes, yeah, but let me deal with it anyway. Let me go through the process anyway, because I have an inkling, or I've seen this game before, and I'm suspicious, okay? So you have to know to test cases. Number 22, and this happens over time. This is not something that can happen immediately. But the more you study, the more you review, the more you have a redo log going, okay? You want to start sensing and realizing that the question you're doing is related to something you've seen before, almost always, right? It can't be the case that every question feels new, because it's not. It's a standardized test. There must be something repetitive. Critical reasoning, they use similar logical errors again and again and again. In quant, they're using the same topics and structures again and again and again. In sentence correction, the same errors again and again and again. In reading comp, they're asking about the same kinds of things again and again and again. Okay. Over time, you have to start making connections to things you've done before. If you've been studying for 3 months and that doesn't happen very often, you're not studying well. If every question feels basically new, you're not studying well. It needs to be repetitive. '23, you want to start getting really, really, really good at noticing pronouns and knowing where an antecedent is and knowing how the GMAT messes up pronouns. Okay, they're small words, you know, they're easy to gloss over, but you want to just start noticing there's a pronoun, especially these 5. When you notice these pronouns, find the antecedent, find the noun they replace, make sure it agrees, make sure it's not ambiguous. Okay. Noticing pronouns is one of the 5 big things to notice in sentence correction. I think, yeah, we've covered, this is the last sentence correction slide because we're on number 23 of 24. Those are the things to study in sentence correction: sentence structure, modifiers, parallelism, pronouns, comparisons. Get really good at those 5 things, for God's sakes. Sentence correction becomes very repetitive, very easy when you get good at those things. Okay. Last but not least, and this one is probably the most like subject specific, but it's just so weird and so pervasive that I've decided to make it one of the top 24. Okay. You want to really work to understand the relationship between divisibility and primes. It's a abstract way to think about numbers that most people haven't, but a lot of questions deal with this kind of thing. And it's very, very helpful to connect the two. So this chart here, you can search, if you Google search like prime factor colored circle chart. And just kind of investigate this and notice patterns in it and understand why certain colors are what they are. Ultimately, it's showing you the DNA of the numbers up to 100. And the DNA of integers are the prime factors. They tell you everything you need to know about that number. They are how the number is built. They tell you what the number is a multiple of, what the factors are, what is not a factor. It's all based on the primes. And you need to understand that really well for concrete numbers so that you can deal with more abstract cases with this conceptual understanding of how prime numbers build integers and build multiples. Okay. And honestly, gang, that's it. That's all you got to do. Obviously, there are little, subtopics and all these little rules that you have to memorize. I'm not saying that those don't exist. But mostly those are not the problem. Okay. You need to collect them, you need to make your flashcards for them, but mostly those are not the issue. It's other things. It's the organization of the things you know. It's seeing the different approaches and knowing how to deal with them. Okay. It's having good habits and good organization and good testing cases and all these things using those concepts. But mostly this is what I want. If you were to ask me, what advice do you have? I say these 24 things. This is how you study for the GMAT. This is what you need to be thinking about. If you're not doing it this way, you're not, we are Cassandra screaming into the void and you're just not listening. But this is what you want to do to get a really good score on this test, to really figure out the guts and gears of it. All right. If you are curious about any upcoming classes, you can search that link there, manhattanprep.com, GMAT/classes. Try a first one for free. I have some coming up next week, actually. I have one that just started today. I will stick around now for any questions you all have. But otherwise, I'm going to stop this recording. Thank you all for watching. Hope to see you in class soon.